On a crisp autumn morning, Thomas Mitchell stood before the weathered barn doors, his life savings of $500 clutched in his calloused hands. The locals called it a fool's purchase, just another decaying structure on the edge of town. But something about this place called to him, like a whisper from the past. As he pushed open those creaking doors, dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light, revealing the first glimpse of what lay hidden in the shadows. For decades, this barn had kept its secrets, waiting for the right person to uncover them. What Thomas found inside would not only unlock a forgotten mystery, but reshape his entire destiny in ways he never imagined. Could a simple $500 investment really hold the key to the greatest discovery of his life? Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's revelation will leave you speechless. The real estate agent hadn't even bothered to show up for the closing. Thomas found the paperwork stuffed into a rusty mailbox at the property's edge, along with a single key so weathered it might crumble to dust before opening any locks. He couldn't blame them. Who'd waste time on a $500 sale? 20 years of restoration work had taught Thomas to see potential where others saw decay. His fingers, rough from countless hours of sanding and refinishing, traced the barn's timber frame. Old-growth oak, each beam hand-hewn and joined with wooden pegs instead of nails. They didn't build like this anymore. You're making a mistake, Mr. Mitchell. The voice startled him. An elderly woman stood at the property line, her silver hair caught in the morning breeze. Some things are better left buried in the past. Mrs. Henderson, right? From the Historical Society. Thomas smiled, though the woman's warning sent a chill down his spine. I appreciate the concern, but you're the fourth person to buy this place in 30 years. She clutched her cardigan closer. None of the others lasted more than a month. Thomas pulled a small notepad from his jacket pocket, a habit from years of apprenticeship. Because of the repair costs? Mrs. Henderson's laugh held no humor. You'll see. She turned to leave, then paused. When you find things, certain things, bring them to the library. Ask for Martha. She'll know what to do. Before Thomas could question her further, she was gone, leaving him with more questions than answers. He'd heard rumors about the property, of course. Every small town had its share of haunted barns and cursed houses. But at this price, he couldn't afford to be superstitious. The first lock yielded surprisingly easily to the key. Inside, afternoon light filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating decades of dust and debris. Thomas inhaled deeply. Beneath, the must and decay. He caught hints of old wood, leather, and something metallic. He'd learned to trust his senses during his restoration career. Every building had its own story, told through scents and textures as much as through historical records. This barn story, he suspected, ran deeper than most. Moving carefully across worn floorboards, Thomas began his initial survey. The main floor was largely empty, save for rotting hay and broken farm equipment, but the craftsmanship of the structure itself pointed to money, serious money. Why would someone with such resources abandon this place? A glint of brass caught his eye as he examined the rafters. Wedged between two beams was a pocket watch, its case dulled by time but still intact. Thomas carefully worked it free. The hands had stopped at 3:47, and an inscription on the back read, 2 EM. Time will tell. 1923. The watch felt heavy in his palm, its weight somehow more than mere brass, and gears should account for. As he studied it, a shadow passed across the barn's entrance. Thomas looked up to find a young woman with auburn hair tied back in a practical bun, wearing the kind of sensible shoes librarians seemed to favor. I'm Martha, she said without preamble. Mrs. Henderson called. She said you might need my help. Her eyes fixed on the watch in Thomas's hand, and something like recognition flickered across her face. You've already found one of them, I see. One of what? Martha stepped fully into the barn, her presence somehow making the vast space feel smaller, more intimate. The pieces of the puzzle, Mr. Mitchell. The real question is, are you ready to learn what they mean? Thomas looked down at the watch, then back at Martha. His $500 gamble was already proving more intriguing than he'd imagined. Tell me everything. Martha's fingers traced the watch's inscription with practiced care. The afternoon light, streaming through the barn's broken boards, caught the brass surface, making it gleam like new despite its age. "EM would be Elizabeth Montgomery," she said, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone used to unraveling historical mysteries. The last of the old Montgomery family, at least the last one who mattered. Thomas pulled a rickety wooden crate over and sat, sensing a story worth hearing. Montgomery, weren't they the banking family? Banking, railways, shipping. Martha smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They owned half the county before the crash of '29. This barn was part of their summer estate. A bit elaborate for storing hay, Thomas observed, glancing up at the intricate wooden trusses above. The Montgomerys never did anything small. Martha handed the watch back carefully. Elizabeth was different, though. After the crash, when the rest of the family fled to Europe, she stayed. Kept this place running through the Depression, they say. Thomas tucked the watch into his shirt pocket, its weight a constant reminder against his chest. And now it's worth $500. Worth? Martha's laugh held a hint of mystery. Mr. Mitchell, value and worth are rarely the same thing. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. Through the open barn doors, they watched a sleek black Mercedes pull up. The man who stepped out looked like he'd just walked off Wall Street. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, calculated smile. Thomas Mitchell. His shoes, clearly not chosen for farmland, crunched across the gravel. Jack Preston, Riverfront Development. Got a minute? Martha's posture stiffened. I should go, but Mr. Mitchell. She hesitated. Check behind the boards near the north wall. Some of them sound hollow when you tap them. She slipped out past Preston, who barely acknowledged her existence. Thomas watched their contrasting figures, Martha's practical denim and Preston's tailored wool, before turning his attention to the developer. Nice place you've got here, Preston said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Quite a fixer-upper. It has potential. It has more than that. Preston pulled a folded document from his briefcase. It has location. The whole area's being rezoned for commercial use. Shopping centres, condos, riverside dining. Progress, Mr. Mitchell. And I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to be part of it. Thomas felt the watch grow heavier in his pocket. I just bought it. For a song. Preston's smile remained fixed. I'm offering you 100 times your investment. That's more than fair. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Preston handed him a business card. Development's coming, whether this old barn's part of it or not. Be a shame if something happened to it before you could restore it. After Preston left, Thomas found himself drawn to the north wall. The boards there looked no different from any others. But Martha's words echoed in his mind. He tapped along the wall, listening. On the fifth board, the sound changed. Hollow, just as she'd said. It took careful work with a pry bar to remove the board without damaging it. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected it from decades of dust and damp, lay a leather-bound journal. The first page bore the same elegant script as the watch's inscription, Property of Elizabeth Montgomery. Below that, a single line sent shivers down Thomas's spine. Let this record stand as testimony to what we have safeguarded here. Thomas sank onto his crate, journal in hand. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the barn, he began to read, April 15th, 1923. Today we sealed the final chamber. Richard says it's too dangerous to keep records, but some things must not be forgotten. The watch will serve as the first key. There will be others. If you're reading this, you've already found one. God grant you the wisdom to know what to do with what you find. The entry ended there. Thomas looked up to find the barn grown dark around him, time having slipped away as he read. In the distance, a car door slammed, then another. Flashlight. Beams swept across the property line. He carefully wrapped the journal and tucked it away with the watch. Something told him he didn't want to be discovered with either. Not yet. As he locked up for the night, Preston's threat hung in the air like wood smoke. But now Thomas knew he couldn't sell, not until he understood what Elizabeth Montgomery had hidden here and why people seemed so interested in making sure it stayed hidden. The library's archives smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Thomas watched as Martha navigated the space with practiced efficiency, pulling records from drawers and shelves without hesitation. Her fingers danced across file tabs and index cards with the surety of a pianist at familiar keys. The Montgomerys were meticulous record keepers, she said, spreading a collection of yellowed newspapers across the reading room table. At least until 1923. After that, it's like they vanished from public life. The same year as the journal entry. Thomas carefully turned a brittle page. And the watch. Exactly. Martha pushed her reading glasses up her nose, a gesture Thomas was beginning to find endearing. But look at this. Property taxes on the barn were paid regularly until 1965, 30 years after the rest of the estate was sold off. Thomas leaned closer, catching a hint of Martha's lavender shampoo. Elizabeth kept it. But why? Martha's finger traced a line of text. The family had lost everything else. What was so important about a barn? A throat cleared behind them. They turned to find Mrs. Henderson watching, her eyes sharp despite her age. Perhaps you're asking the wrong questions. She placed a manila envelope on their table. These were dropped off for safekeeping years ago. I was told to give them to whoever found the watch. Inside the envelope, tied with faded blue ribbon, was a bundle of letters. The paper was delicate, the ink faded, but still legible. Thomas recognized Elizabeth's handwriting immediately, but these weren't diary entries. They were love letters. "My dearest Thomas," Martha read aloud, then glanced at him with raised eyebrows. "Your namesake, it seems." "Thomas Bradford," Mrs. Henderson supplied. "He served in the Great War, came back a hero, but—" She trailed. Off Thomas gently untied the ribbon. The letters spilled across the table like autumn leaves, each one dated and carefully preserved. As they read, a story emerged, one of secret meetings, hidden passages, and a love that defied the social boundaries of their time. Bradford was a soldier, but he was also something else, Martha murmured, scanning the letters. "Look at these. References. Our mutual cause. The sacred trust. Those we protect." "He wasn't just a soldier," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "He was part of a network, people who helped others find their way to freedom, even after the war. The barn was more than just a barn." Thomas thought of the watch, the journal, the hidden compartment. It was a way station, among other things. Mrs. Henderson's voice held warning. "Be careful what you uncover, Mr. Mitchell. Some secrets are still dangerous. Even after all these years." A shadow passed across the library windows. Thomas caught a glimpse of an expensive suit, a familiar silhouette. Preston was watching. Martha noticed too. She quickly gathered the letters, returning them to their envelope. "You need to see something else. In the basement archives." The basement stacks were a maze of metal shelving and bare fluorescent bulbs. Martha led him to a back corner where county plat maps hung in flat files. She pulled one out, dated 1922. "The original barn plans," she said, spreading the blueprints. "Look at the foundation specifications." Thomas studied the drawings, his restoration experience lending insight. "These walls are double thick, and these spaces—" He traced a series of small rooms marked only as storage. "They don't match the current layout, because what you see now isn't the whole structure." Martha's eyes gleamed with discovery. "There's more behind those walls. Elizabeth and Thomas didn't just hide people, they hid evidence, records, names, things that could have destroyed powerful people if they'd been found. And now Preston wants to demolish it all." Thomas thought of the developer's threat. "We need to find what they hid before he does." "We?" Martha's question held more than professional curiosity. I could use a research partner. Thomas smiled. Someone who knows her way around historical mysteries. A noise from the stairwell sent them both turning. But it was just the old building settling, groaning under decades of stories and secrets. Tomorrow, then, Martha said. Dawn's the best time for exploring old buildings. Dawn it is. Thomas carefully rolled the blueprints. And Martha? Thank you. She paused at the stairs. For what? For making my $500 investment a lot more interesting than I bargained for. Her laugh echoed in the basement stacks. Oh, Mr. Mitchell, you haven't seen interesting yet. As Thomas drove home that night, the watch heavy in his pocket, and the journal secure in his glove compartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was right. Whatever Elizabeth Montgomery and Thomas Bradford had hidden in that barn, whatever had kept Preston's flashlight-wielding scouts searching the property after dark, he was only beginning to uncover. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor shades when Thomas arrived at the barn, but Martha was already there. She wasn't alone. An elegant woman in her 60s stood beside her, studying the barn, with eyes that seemed to look into the past. Thomas, meet Catherine Montgomery Pierce, Martha said softly, Elizabeth's granddaughter. Catherine's handshake was firm, her bearing aristocratic despite her casual clothing. So you're the one who found my grandmother's watch. It wasn't a question. You knew about it? Thomas asked. I knew there were things hidden here. She gestured at the barn. Family legends, whispered stories. Grandmother never told us directly, said it was safer that way. But she made sure certain stories were passed down. From her bag, Catherine withdrew a leather-bound photo album. The morning light caught a familiar monogram on its cover. E.M. This was her personal album. Catherine's fingers traced the embossed letters. The official family photos are in museums, but these she kept private. The first photo showed the barn in its prime, freshly painted, surrounded by manicured gardens. A woman in a white dress stood in the doorway, Elizabeth young and beautiful, with Thomas Bradford's watch chain glinting at her waist. The official story was that she never married because of family obligations, Catherine said, turning pages. The truth was more complicated. The next photo showed a group of people, Elizabeth, Thomas Bradford and others, standing before the barn. Their poses were casual, but Thomas noticed something odd. They're all wearing watches, he said. Like the one I found, Catherine nodded. Timepieces were their signals. Different times meant different things. 3:47, for instance, that meant urgent help needed. Martha leaned in closer. The watch you found was stopped at 3:47. The last signal. Catherine's voice held old grief. The night the barn caught fire, Thomas and Martha exchanged glances. Fire? There was no sign of fire damage in the structure. Not a real fire. Catherine turned another page. A staged one, to cover their tracks when they learned they'd been discovered. The next morning, Thomas Bradford disappeared. They found his army coat in the river 3 days later. And Elizabeth? Thomas asked, though he feared he knew the answer. Stayed here, kept paying the taxes, kept the secrets. Catherine closed the album carefully. Even when they threatened her, even when they took everything else, she protected this place. Who threatened her? Martha's question was gentle. The same kinds of people who always fight against progress. Catherine's gaze drifted to the road, where a familiar black Mercedes crept past. The ones who profit from keeping others down. She stood straighter, Montgomery pride evident in her bearing. Preston's not the first to try buying this place. They've been trying for 3 generations, but we're not the only family with stories here, not the only ones with secrets worth protecting. A glint of metal caught Thomas's eye. Catherine wore a watch, antique and brass, identical to the one he'd found. She noticed his gaze. We all kept one, the whole network. Some families still have them, though most don't know what they mean anymore. She smiled sadly. The stories fade, but the important things remain, if you know where to look. Martha pulled out the blueprints they'd found. We think there are hidden rooms. There are. Catherine's certainty was absolute. And more than that. What's hidden here? It's not just about my family's past. It's about everyone's future. She reached into her bag again, withdrawing. An old photograph. This was the last picture taken of them all together. Look at the background. The photo showed the group again, but this time Thomas noticed something in the barn's window. A flash of light, a reflection perhaps, forming a distinct pattern. "It's a map," Martha breathed. "Hidden in plain sight," Grandmother always said. The truth was right in front of us. Catherine handed Thomas the photo. I think she was waiting for the right person to see it. She turned to go, then paused. "Mr. Mitchell, the developer will be back. With more money, more threats. Whatever you find, make sure it was worth my grandmother's sacrifice." They watched her drive away, the photo heavy in Thomas's hands. He studied it in the strengthening morning light, seeing new details emerge. "Ready?" Martha asked, blueprint in hand. Thomas tucked the photo safely away with the journal. Time to see what Elizabeth and Thomas were really hiding. Inside the barn, dust motes swirled in shafts of morning light as Thomas and Martha compared the old photograph to the blueprint. The pattern from the window reflection aligned perfectly with a section of the foundation wall that shouldn't have. Existed according to the county records. The official plans show solid concrete here, Martha said, tapping the blueprint. But look at the mortar lines. She ran her fingers along the wall's base. These bricks were added later. They don't match the original foundation. Thomas knocked against the bricks, listening to the subtle changes in sound. 20 years of restoration work had taught him to read buildings like books. There's definitely space behind here, but we'll need... A truck engine rumbled outside. Through the gaps in the weathered boards, they saw a local news van pulling up. Word travels fast in small towns. Martha sighed. Someone must have seen Catherine's car. Thomas grabbed his tool bag. Then we'd better work faster. They started, carefully documenting everything with Martha's camera before Thomas began removing bricks. The mortar crumbled easily. Designed to, he realized. After 20 minutes, they had cleared enough to reveal a narrow space beyond. "Hand me that flashlight." Thomas reached into the opening. His fingers brushed something smooth and cool. Glass. Carefully, he withdrew a mason jar, its contents clinking softly. Even through decades of dust, gold coins gleamed inside. "Double. Eagles," Martha breathed, examining one through the glass. "These were recalled in 1933, worth a fortune now." "Not just money," Thomas said, remembering Catherine's words. "Emergency funds, for people they were helping." A sharp knock at the barn. Door made them both jump. Through the gaps, they could see a reporter and cameraman waiting. "Mr. Mitchell, Jenny Chen from Channel 5 News. We'd love to do a story on your restoration project." Martha quickly wrapped the jar in her jacket. Thomas headed for the door, buying. Her time to secure their find. "Ms. Chen," he smiled, positioning himself to block the camera's view inside. "What brings Channel 5 all the way out here?" "Sources say Catherine Montgomery Pierce was seen visiting. Any comment on the property's connection to the Montgomery banking fortune?" Behind the reporter, Thomas spotted Preston's Mercedes pulling up. The developer emerged, straightening his tie with practiced smoothness. "Actually," Preston called out, striding over, "I can comment on that. Riverfront Development is pleased to announce plans for a historic preservation project here." The reporter turned, scenting a bigger story. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "We've just acquired options on the surrounding parcels," Preston continued, "and we're offering Mr. Mitchell a very generous partnership opportunity. Isn't that right, Thomas?" Before Thomas could respond, Martha appeared at his side. She'd changed into what he thought of as her professional librarian mode, hair up, glasses on, clipboard in hand. "I'm afraid Mr. Mitchell can't comment on any development plans," she said crisply. "The Historical Society is currently evaluating the site for protected status. Any alterations would need to go through proper channels." Preston's smile flickered. "The Historical Society doesn't have jurisdiction. Actually, Martha cut in, under Municipal Code 47.3, any structure with documented historical significance from the pre-Depression era automatically qualifies for review. She adjusted her glasses. I'm sure your legal team can explain the details. The reporter's attention swung back. So the Historical Society is officially involved. No comment at this time, Martha said smoothly. But we welcome Channel 5's interest in local preservation efforts. As the reporter pressed Preston for details, Martha quietly guided Thomas back inside. Behind the barn's weathered walls, they both let out shaky breaths. Municipal Code 47.3, Thomas asked. Martha's professional mask cracked into a grin. I have. No idea if that's real, but it'll take his lawyers at least a day to check. Thomas laughed, tension breaking. You're something else, you know that? So I've been told. She pulled out the jar of coins. Now want to see what else Elizabeth and Thomas hid for us to find? The coins gleamed in the dusty light, each one a piece of history, each one a promise of more secrets to come. Outside, they could hear Preston still trying to control the story. But in here, Thomas thought, the real story was just beginning to emerge. After the reporters finally left, Thomas and Martha returned to their exploration. The mason jar of coins sat safely hidden in Martha's satchel, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface of the barn's secrets. The coins weren't just emergency funds, Martha said, studying Elizabeth's journal. Look at these entries from 1924. She talks about shipments and deliveries, but never mentions what's being shipped. Thomas ran his hand along the wall where they'd found the coins. During Prohibition, a lot of old buildings had hidden storage areas. For bootlegging. Martha raised an eyebrow. Among other things. Thomas knocked against the floorboards, moving systematically across the space. Rich families like the Montgomerys, they had connections, ways to get things people needed, not just alcohol. Or people who needed hiding, Martha added softly. The hollow sound of Thomas's knocking changed. He looked up, meeting Martha's eyes. Together, they cleared away decades of debris, revealing a trapdoor cleverly concealed in the floorboards. The craftsmanship is incredible, Thomas marveled, examining the edges that blended seamlessly with surrounding boards. You'd never find this if you weren't looking for it. The hinges protested, with years of disuse, but the door finally lifted. Stone steps descended into darkness. Martha's flashlight beam revealed walls lined with empty shelves and old wine racks. A wine cellar? Martha swept the light across the space. But look at the size. It extends beyond the barn's foundation. Thomas started down the steps, testing each one carefully. These weren't just for storing wine. He pointed to markings scratched into the wall. Dates, numbers, cryptic symbols. This was a way station, part of a larger network. In one corner, partially hidden behind a fallen shelf, they found an old wine press. But something about it caught Thomas's eye. This isn't right, he said, examining the mechanism. The proportions are wrong for grapes. He turned a handle, and a section of the press swung out like a door, revealing a hollow space inside. A hiding place within a hiding place, Martha breathed. Inside, they found a dusty leather case. Thomas opened it carefully, revealing a complex series of gears and levers. It's part of the press, he realized. But look at these markings. They match the ones on the wall. Martha compared them to Elizabeth's journal. They're not just dates, they're coordinates, times, meeting points. She looked up excitedly. The press wasn't just for show. It was a coding machine, like the German. Enigma? Similar principle, maybe. But this one, Martha traced the symbols. This one was for sending messages about safe routes, safe houses. She paused. The watch you found, it wasn't just telling time, it was part of the code. A loud creak from above made them both freeze. Footsteps crossed the barn floor. Mr. Mitchell? Preston's voice echoed. I know you're here. We need to talk about your interference with my development plans. Thomas quickly closed the trapdoor, but not before Martha grabbed the leather case. They pressed themselves against the cellar wall, hardly daring to breathe. The Historical Society's involvement is unfortunate, Preston continued above them. But everything has a price. Name yours. In the darkness, Martha's hand found Thomas's. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was firm. No answer. That's fine. I'll leave my new offer here. But remember, buildings this old, they're dangerous. Accidents happen. Would be a shame if all this history went up in smoke. They waited in tense silence until Preston's footsteps retreated, followed by the slam of his car door. Only then did they emerge from the cellar, blinking in the afternoon light. On top of Elizabeth's journal lay Preston's business card with a number written on it. $250,000. $250,000, Thomas said quietly. That's a lot of money. Martha carefully opened the leather case, revealing the complex mechanism inside. This is worth more. What Elizabeth and Thomas built here, what they protected, you can't put a price on that. Thomas picked up the business card, then looked at the watch he'd found that first day. The hand still pointed to 3:47, a call for urgent help. No, he said, tearing the card in half. You can't. Martha smiled, relief clear on her face. So what's our next move? Thomas gestured to the coding machine. We figure out what they were protecting, and then we make sure it stays protected. The torn pieces of Preston's card fluttered to the floor, joining decades of dust and secrets in the barn that was quickly becoming worth far more than its $500 price tag. Back in the library's research room, Martha spread out their findings across the large oak table. Elizabeth's journal, the coding machine, and a leather-bound ledger they'd discovered hidden inside the wine press's base. The ledger's pages were filled with columns of numbers and seemingly random letters. It's beautiful, really, Martha said, examining the coding machine under the bright desk lamp. See how these gears align? Each one changes the position of the next in sequence. Thomas studied the ledger entries, like combining multiple codes into one message. Exactly. And look at this. She pointed to recurring patterns in the numbers. These sequences appear every few entries, always followed by similar letter groups. A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway, looking more serious than usual. You found Howard's machine, she said, eyes fixed on the device. Thomas and Martha exchanged glances. Howard Thompson, master craftsman, built that device for Thomas Bradford in 1922. She approached slowly, as if the machine might spook like a wild animal. My father helped maintain it. Martha's eyes widened. Your father was part of the network? Mrs. Henderson nodded, carefully turning one of the gears. The mechanism moved smoothly despite its age. The Montgomerys weren't the only family involved. Dozens of us helped, each playing our part. The barn was just one link in a longer chain. She reached into her cardigan pocket and withdrew a small notebook, its pages yellow with age. Dad's notes on the codes, he made me memorize them as a girl, though I never knew exactly what we were protecting. Thomas accepted the notebook with reverence. And now I think it's time someone knew. She pulled up a chair. The basic system was simple. Numbers indicated locations, latitude and longitude, broken into segments. Letters were dates and times. But the genius was in the variation. Working together, they began to decode the ledger. Entries, a pattern emerged. Coordinates forming a web of safe houses and meeting points stretching from their small town to cities hundreds of miles away. Look at these dates, Martha said suddenly. They span decades, long after Prohibition ended. Mrs. Henderson smiled sadly. Alcohol wasn't the only thing people needed to hide from. Every era has its own refugees, its own people in need of shelter. Thomas traced a series of coordinates on the library's old maps. These routes, they follow the same paths as the key Underground Railroad, don't they? The old networks never really died, Mrs. Henderson confirmed. They just adapted, evolved. When Elizabeth and Thomas took over the barn, they modernized a system that had existed since before the Civil War. Martha was rapidly taking notes. So the watches, the codes, different times meant different things. 3:47, the time on your watch, that was for immediate danger. Someone needed extraction, fast. Thomas thought of Elizabeth alone in the barn that final night. The watch stopping at 3:47. She was trying to help someone. Several someones, Mrs. Henderson corrected. A family. Their paperwork was problematic. In those days, the wrong papers could mean... She trailed off. What happened to them? Martha asked softly. They made it out. Elizabeth made sure of that, but the authorities were closing in. The fire was staged to destroy records that could have led back to other safe houses, other helpers. And Thomas Bradford, Mrs. Henderson's eyes grew distant. His coat in the river threw them off the trail. He made it to Canada, started a new network there. Elizabeth stayed to protect the barn, knowing they'd watch her, knowing she could never join him. Thomas picked up the ledger again, seeing it with new eyes. These recent entries... The network's still active, isn't it? Still. Helping people? Why do you think Preston's so interested in demolishing the barn? Mrs. Henderson stood slowly. Some people profit from others' fear. Always have. The network threatens that profit. She headed for the door, then paused. Catherine gave you her grandmother's photo for a reason. The pattern in the window? It's not just a map of the barn. It's a map of the entire county network, every safe house, every route. She fixed them with a stern look. If Preston's people find it, they won't, Thomas said firmly. After she left, Thomas and Martha sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what they'd learned. Their simple restoration project had become something far larger. Still think it was worth the 500? Martha asked. Attempting to lighten the mood, Thomas looked at the decoded ledger entries, each one representing lives saved, families protected, hope preserved. More than ever. A message alert chimed on Martha's phone. Her face paled as she read it. What is it? Preston filed for emergency demolition permits, claims the barn is structurally unsound. She looked up, fear and determination warring in her expression. We have 48 hours before they can legally tear it down. Thomas grabbed Elizabeth's journal. Then we have 48 hours to prove them wrong, to protect what Elizabeth and Thomas died protecting. Where do we start? He opened the journal to the photo Catherine had given them. We find every safe house on this map. The network's still out there, and something tells me they've been waiting for someone to find that watch. Dawn was still hours away when Thomas and Martha returned to the barn. The moon cast long shadows through the broken boards, their flashlight beams dancing across worn floorboards as they compared the photo's window pattern to their map of decoded. In coordinates, the routes all converge here, Martha whispered, tracing lines on the weathered paper. But there's something wrong with the scale. These distances don't make sense unless they go underground. Thomas moved to the wine cellar entrance. The cellar extends beyond the foundation, remember? In the cellar, they examined the walls more carefully. Martha ran her fingers along the rough stone, stopping at an odd seam. Thomas, look at this mortar. It's different. He pressed against the wall section. With a grinding sound, a hidden door swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel stretching into darkness. How did we miss this before? We weren't looking for it, Martha said, consulting Elizabeth's journal. The latest entries talk about maintaining the old ways. I thought she meant traditions, but she meant actual pathways. Their flashlights revealed tracks in the tunnel's dirt floor, recent ones. Someone's still using this, Thomas realized. Distant sound made them freeze, footsteps above, then the scrape of the cellar door opening. Down here, a voice called. Heat sensors show 2 signatures. Martha clicked off her flashlight. Preston's people. Thomas grabbed her hand, leading her down the tunnel. Behind them, voices and lights grew closer. The passage twisted, branched. At each intersection, Thomas checked the photo pattern against moss patterns on the walls, Elizabeth's markers, still visible after all these years. They emerged into a larger chamber. Railroad ties formed the ceiling, and the remnants of old tracks ran along one wall. They were under the abandoned rail line that bordered the property. The whole network, Martha breathed. It literally was an underground railroad. More voices echoed from the tunnels. They pressed themselves against the wall behind a fallen support beam. Two men in tactical gear passed their hiding spot, radios crackling. Northeast tunnel clear, moving to section B. When the voices faded, Martha pulled out her phone, quickly texting, letting Mrs. Henderson know. If the network's still active, they need to know their routes are compromised. We need to get back, Thomas said. Get the ledger somewhere safe before a beam of light caught them. Don't move. They froze. From the tunnel they'd come through, Preston emerged, flanked by security men. His expensive suit looked out of place in the underground chamber. I must admit, I'm impressed, he said, brushing dirt from his sleeve. We've been trying to find these tunnels for months. All it took was a restoration expert and a librarian. He gestured to one of his men. The ledger, please, and Elizabeth's journal. Martha clutched her bag closer. These are historical documents. They belong to the town library. Those documents detail an active criminal network, Preston said smoothly. Helping illegal immigrants, smuggling people across borders. Did you really think this was just about real estate? It's about profit, Thomas said. Like Mrs. Henderson told us, can't have people helping others for free, can we? Might cut into your business. Preston's smile turned cold. The demolition permit comes through in 36 hours. By this time, tomorrow, these tunnels will be filled with concrete. The evidence will be buried, and the network retired. The ledger and journal, please. A distant train whistle echoed through the chamber. Martha's phone buzzed in her pocket. Last chance to do this the easy way, Preston warned. The train whistle grew louder. Martha met Thomas's eyes, a silent message passing between them. She clutched the bag tighter. Actually, she said, I think this is your last chance. The chamber, filled with blinding light as the wall behind them slid open, a service tunnel for the active rail line, and in it stood Mrs. Henderson with two police officers. Mr. Preston, one officer said, we've received some interesting evidence about your development company. Would you mind coming with us? As they led Preston and his men away, Mrs. Henderson smiled. The network looks after its own, she said. Always has. In the distance, dawn was breaking. They had 36 hours to document everything, to prove the barn's historical significance before the demolition permit took effect. But now they weren't working alone. Thomas took Martha's hand as they climbed back to the surface. Still up for a little more historical research? Her answering smile was brighter than the rising sun, always. The morning sun streamed through the library windows as Thomas and Martha sorted through boxes of historical records. Preston's arrest had bought them time, but the demolition permit was still active. They needed proof of the barn's historical significance, official proof that would stand up in court. Look at this, Martha said, pulling out a yellowed newspaper. 1924 Society pages. Elizabeth Montgomery hosting a charitable organization at the barn. She smiled. That's code. These society events were network meetings. Hiding in plain sight, Thomas mused, examining the grainy photograph. The best secrets are the ones everyone can see, but nobody notices. Martha reached for another box, but her sleeve caught on the edge, sending papers cascading to the floor. As they gathered them up, something metallic clinked against the hardwood. A silver locket lay partially hidden under a folder. Its surface was tarnished, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable, the same style as Elizabeth's watch. That's not from our archive, Martha said, her voice strange. She picked up the locket with trembling fingers. Martha! She opened the clasp. Carefully, Inside was a tiny photograph, a young woman in 1920s dress, and behind it, folded tightly, a piece of paper. "I never knew," she whispered. "All those stories about Great Aunt Rose, they were about this." Thomas moved closer, seeing tears in her eyes. "Rose Henderson," Martha continued. "Mrs. Henderson's sister. She worked with Elizabeth, helped run the network. But she disappeared in 1925. The family never knew what happened to her." She unfolded the paper, a hand-drawn map fragment, its edges worn. "She didn't disappear," Thomas realized. "She went underground, became part of the network, full-time." Martha traced the photograph with her finger. "All those times Mrs. Henderson helped us. She knew. She was watching me, waiting to see if I'd find out the truth about my own family." The library door opened. Catherine Montgomery Pierce entered, looking elegant despite the early hour. "I see you found it," she said, nodding at the locket. "Rose's final message. We've been protecting it, waiting for the right moment." "You knew?" Martha asked. "About your connection?" "Of course. The networks were built on family ties, on trust passed down through generations. Why do you think you felt so drawn to this mystery?" She sat down, pulling out a familiar brass watch. "Elizabeth didn't just protect the barn. She protected the families of everyone involved, their stories, their sacrifices." "But why keep it secret so long?" Thomas asked. "The work isn't finished," Catherine said simply. "The network adapted, evolved, different times, different needs, but always the same mission, helping people find safety, freedom, hope." Martha opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "The Historical Society database. If Rose was working with Elizabeth..." Her eyes lit up. "Here. Property. Records from 1925. Rose Henderson listed as co-owner of 3 safe houses. Legal proof of the network's existence." "Enough to stop the demolition?" Thomas asked. "Enough to start the process." Catherine stood. "But Preston isn't finished. Men like him, they have backup plans. The demolition permit is just one weapon in their arsenal." As if summoned by her words, Martha's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Henderson. "Urgent. Preston made bail." "How long until the permit goes into effect?" Catherine asked. 29 hours, Thomas answered. "Then we have 29 hours to document everything, every tunnel, every hidden room, every piece of evidence that proves what this place really means." Catherine's voice held steel. "Rose and Elizabeth died protecting these secrets. Now it's our turn to protect their legacy." Martha clutched the locket. "I want to know everything about Rose, about her work with Elizabeth." "It's not just history," Catherine said gently. "The network is still out there, still helping people. And now that you know your connection, we're part of it," Thomas finished. "Whether we meant to be or not," Martha's phone buzzed again. A photo from Mrs. Henderson, Preston's car pulling up to the courthouse. "He'll try for an emergency execution of the permit," Martha said. "We need to work fast." Thomas took her hand, feeling the weight of the locket between their palms. "Then let's write your great-aunt's story, and Elizabeth's, and everyone else who made this place more than just a barn." Catherine smiled. "Elizabeth always said the right people would find their way here eventually." She headed for the door. "I'll make some calls. The network protects its own." In the morning light, the silver locket gleamed like a promise. Thomas looked at Martha, seeing the same determination in her eyes that must have driven Rose and Elizabeth all those years ago. "Ready to make some history?" he asked. She pocketed the locket, its weight a reminder of the legacy they now shared. "Let's start with saving it first." Night fell early, storm clouds gathering over the barn as Thomas and Martha documented the tunnel system. Their flashlight beams caught old marks on the walls, dates, symbols, the silent language of those who'd passed through seeking safety. "The Historical Society photographer comes tomorrow morning," Martha said, checking her phone. "If we can get enough documented before a crash from above cut her off." They doused their lights, listening to footsteps cross the barn floor. "Careful with that," a harsh voice warned. "Boss wants it to look like an accident." Martha's hand found Thomas's in the dark. Through the ceiling boards they could see flashlight. "Beams moving. Pour it along the walls," another voice said. "When the lightning hits..." The sharp smell of gasoline drifted down. "They're going to burn it," Martha whispered. "Make it look like lightning struck." Thomas felt his way along the wall, remembering Elizabeth's journal. There had to be another way out. His fingers found a loose stone, then another. Behind them, smooth wood. "Help me with this," he whispered. Together they eased the panel open, revealing a narrow passage. As they slipped inside, Thomas's light caught something propped in the corner, long, wooden, wrapped in oilcloth. Martha carefully unwrapped it. A Civil War-era rifle emerged, its brass fittings dull with age. Carved into the stock was a series of notches and a set of initials, TB. "Thomas Bradford's," she breathed. "He was a Union soldier before." More footsteps above. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. "We need to get help," Thomas said, "but they're blocking the main exit." Martha examined the rifle more closely. "Look at these notches. They're not battle marks. They're a map, like the ones in Elizabeth's photo." She traced the pattern with her finger. "This shows another way out, through the old Henderson property. Your family's escape route." They followed the passage as it sloped downward, the air growing cooler. Above, they heard the saboteurs retreating, their work done. Thunder rolled overhead. The tunnel ended at a steel door, rusted but solid. Martha's hands shook as she examined the lock. "Rose's locket," she said suddenly, pulling it from her pocket. "It's not just a locket, it's a key." The silver fit perfectly. With a grinding sound, the door swung open into a storm cellar. Through its doors, they could see Rose Henderson's old house, now a local museum. "Call Mrs. Henderson," Thomas said. "I'll get back through the tunnels, try to clean up the gasoline." Before lightning flashed, thunder cracked directly overhead. "No time," Martha grabbed his arm. "We need help now." She punched numbers into her phone as they ran through the rain. "Mrs. Henderson, get the fire department to the barn." "Yes, now." "And Catherine. We need Catherine." They reached the barn's main entrance in time to see a blue Mercedes speed away, Preston behind the wheel. Inside, the gasoline fumes were overwhelming. "We can't let it burn," Martha said. "Not just for history. There are people who still need these routes." Thomas grabbed farming tools from the wall, shovels, old horse blankets, anything to contain a fire. Lightning flashed again, closer. Headlights cut through the rain. Catherine's car skidded to a stop, Mrs. Henderson beside her. More vehicles behind them. The fire department, police. "The rifle," Martha said suddenly. "We left it in the tunnel." "Leave it," Mrs. Henderson commanded. "Those passages have protected their secrets for 150 years. They'll keep a while longer." They worked through the storm. Firefighters, helping remove the gasoline-soaked hay, while police documented the evidence. By dawn, the barn still stood. Catherine surveyed the damage, her face grim. "Preston's desperate. He knows what we found proves this place is worth more than any development." "The rifle alone," Martha began, "is just the beginning," Mrs. Henderson finished. "That tunnel you found, the one to Rose's house, there's a reason it connected to a museum." Understanding dawned in Martha's eyes. The whole museum was a safe house. Still is, in its way. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Rose didn't disappear. She became the museum's first curator, hid in plain sight, just like Elizabeth taught her. Thomas thought of the rifle, still hidden in the tunnel. One piece of a larger puzzle, a legacy of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. 15 hours until the demolition permit, he said. But now we have proof of attempted arson, evidence of historical artifacts, and a Civil War rifle with documented provenance, Catherine added. Enough to force a full historical review. Martha's phone buzzed. She read the message. A slow smile spreading across her face. Preston's bail's been revoked. They found accelerant in his car, receipts for the gasoline. The network protects its own, Mrs. Henderson said softly. Always has. The storm was passing. Through breaks in the clouds, sunlight caught the barns. weathered boards, making them glow like burning copper. "So," Thomas said, taking Martha's hand, "ready to go document a historical artifact?" She squeezed his fingers. A whole museum of them, it seems. They had 15 hours to save the barn, but now they had something more valuable than time. They had proof, and not just of history, but of hope's endurance, of courage passed down through generations. Some legacies, Thomas thought, were worth far more than $500. The museum's back room smelled of cedar and old fabric. Martha and Thomas followed Mrs. Henderson through rows of archived artifacts, each carefully preserved piece telling its own story of the past. Rose knew what she was doing, Mrs. Henderson said, pulling on white cotton gloves. Everything important she logged as a textile donation, hidden in plain sight just like the rest. She reached into a large drawer and carefully withdrew a quilt. Its patterns were intricate, stars and circles in faded blues and browns, each block telling a different story. "It looks like a freedom quilt," Martha said, examining the patterns. "The kind used on the Underground Railroad." "Look closer." Mrs. Henderson pointed to a particular block. "This isn't just any pattern. These are the barn's blueprints." Thomas studied the geometric shapes. Sure enough, hidden in the traditional patterns were accurate representations of the barn's layout, including rooms that didn't appear in any official plans. "Elizabeth made this," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Every square shows a different part of the network, safe houses, routes, signals, the whole system, preserved in something any slave hunter or prohibition agent would dismiss as women's work." Martha traced a line of stitching. "These aren't decorative knots, they're dates, times." Her fingers stopped at a familiar sequence. 347? The whole quilt is a codebook, Thomas realized. Everything they needed to know, right here in the open. The museum curator, a young woman with bright eyes, joined them. Mrs. Henderson said, "You found something in the tunnel, something that proves the connection." Thomas described the rifle, its notched stock, matching patterns in the quilt. The curator's excitement grew with each detail. "This is incredible. The barn, the museum, the Henderson house, they're all connected. One continuous line of history, still active after all these years." "Active?" Thomas asked. Mrs. Henderson and the curator exchanged looks. "Follow me," the curator said. She led them to her office, unlocking a filing cabinet. Inside were modern documents, immigration papers, safety reports, inspection certificates. "The museum doesn't just preserve history," she explained. "We help people start new lives. Legal aid, job training, housing assistance. The old networks adapted. New threats, new needs, same mission." "And Preston?" Martha asked. "He doesn't just build condos," Mrs. Henderson said grimly. "His development projects have destroyed other sites like this up and down the coast, places that help people escape trafficking, domestic violence, persecution." "But why?" Thomas wondered. "What's his real motivation?" The curator pulled up a document on her computer. "Follow the money. His company's tied to private detention centers, predatory loan operations. People in desperate situations are profitable if no one's helping them find alternatives." Martha photographed the quilt patterns, comparing them to their earlier findings. "Each of these safe houses, they're all still standing, still owned by the same families. Generation after generation," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "The work doesn't end just because laws change. There are always people who need help, and people willing to risk everything to provide it." Thunder rumbled outside, another storm approaching. But this time, the barn was protected. Police cars patrolled the property, watching for further sabotage. "Attempts. 12 hours until the demolition permit," Thomas said. "But now we can prove it's not just the barn that's historic. It's this whole network of sites. An entire Underground Railroad preservation district," the curator agreed. "The Historical Society's board is meeting right now to fast-track the nomination." Martha's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "Preston's company is falling apart. FBI's involved now. Something about human trafficking connections. Like I said, Mrs. Henderson smiled, the network protects its own. They spent the next hour documenting everything. The quilt's patterns, the matching rifle notches, the continuous line of ownership records connecting past to present. Not just history anymore, but living proof of ordinary people's extraordinary courage. You know what this means, Martha said as they finally prepared to leave. Once this goes public, the barn will be more than just a landmark. Thomas nodded. It'll be a symbol, hope made visible. Elizabeth would have liked that, Mrs. Henderson said softly. She always said the barn's true purpose wasn't hiding things. It was bringing them to light when the time was right. Outside, the storm clouds were breaking. Sunlight fell across the barn's weathered boards, making them glow like a beacon. Thomas thought of that first day, standing there with $500 in his pocket, having no idea what he was really buying. Not just a building, but a chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that had been changing lives for generations. Ready to make some history? Martha asked, echoing his words from earlier. He took her hand. I think we already have. Back at the library, Martha spread town records across the research table. The Historical Society Board would meet in 10 hours. They needed something legally binding, something even Preston's lawyers couldn't challenge. There's a gap in the records, she said, frustrated. The barn's original deed should be here, but it's missing from the county archives. Could Preston have removed it? Thomas asked. No, it's been missing for decades. Look, she pointed to a notation from 1965. Someone tried to trace the ownership chain back then. The deed was already gone. Mrs. Henderson appeared with another box of records. Elizabeth wasn't careless. If the deed's missing, she hid it. For a reason. Thomas pulled out the watch, his constant companion now. 3:47, when everything changed. What if... He opened the watch's case carefully. The backing was loose, intentionally, he realized. Inside, folded to the size of a postage stamp, was a document. The original deed, Martha breathed. Their hands shook as they carefully unfolded it. The paper was fragile, but the ink remained clear. Thomas Bradford's signature stood bold at the bottom, dated 1922. But it was the final clause that made them all lean forward. This property, being vital to the public good and welfare of all persons seeking refuge, shall not be transferred, sold, or destroyed without unanimous consent of all living heirs of the original trust. Such trust being established in perpetuity for the protection and assistance of those in need, Martha read aloud. A charitable trust, Mrs. Henderson said. Elizabeth and Thomas didn't just own the barn, they made it legally untouchable. But how is it valid? Thomas asked. My deed was for the physical structure only, Martha realized. Legal training kicking in. The trust owns the underlying rights. The property can't be destroyed without permission from all the heirs. And the heirs aren't just the Montgomerys, Mrs. Henderson added. Look at the trustee list. Beneath the main text were more names. Bradford, Henderson. Other families they now knew were part of the network. My great-aunt Rose, Martha said, softly. She was a trustee, which means... You're an heir too, Mrs. Henderson confirmed. One of many. Preston can't touch the barn without all of your consent. Thomas sat back, stunned. Elizabeth and Thomas didn't just protect the physical building, they protected its purpose. Martha was already dialing Catherine. We need to get every heir we can find to the Historical Society meeting. This isn't just about preservation anymore. It's about legal ownership. Mrs. Henderson smiled. I'll make some calls. The network's bigger than Preston knows. Over the next hours, people began arriving at the library. Families whose names appeared in Elizabeth's journal, children and grandchildren of those who'd helped maintain the tunnels. Each one carrying their own pieces of the story, letters, photographs, records carefully preserved. A local judge, herself a descendant of one of the trustee families, reviewed the deed. "It's legitimate," she confirmed. "The trust has been active all these years, even if some of us didn't know it. The barn can't be demolished without unanimous consent from all heirs. And there are hundreds of us," Catherine added, looking around the packed room, "all over the country. Preston couldn't get consent if he spent years trying." Thomas watched as Martha coordinated with the gathering families, her historian's precision helping organize their collected evidence. She belonged here, he realized, not just because of Rose's legacy, but because of her own dedication to preserving what mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from the real estate agent who'd sold him the barn. "Preston's lawyers are withdrawing the demolition permit," he announced. "They know they can't win." A cheer went up around the room. But Martha was still focused on the documents. "This is bigger than stopping a demolition," she said. "Look at what we've found. Proof of a continuous charitable mission spanning centuries. The barn isn't just a historical site. It's a living trust, still serving its original purpose. And now we can protect it properly," Catherine agreed. "Register it openly as a historical landmark, but keep its modern mission alive." Outside, the sun was setting. Through the library windows, they could see the barn silhouetted against the purple sky. No longer just a run-down building bought for $500, but a symbol of hope spanning generations. "Elizabeth and Thomas knew this day would come," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "They left us everything we needed, the watch, the journal, the deed. All we had to do was find it." Martha took Thomas's hand. "They'd be proud of all of us." He squeezed her fingers, thinking of that first morning, standing before the barn's weathered doors. He'd been looking for a project, a chance to restore something old. Instead, he'd found a purpose, a community, a future. "So," Martha asked, "what do we restore first?" Thomas looked around at their newfound family, each one ready to help preserve. Not just a building, but a legacy of compassion and courage. "Everything," he said. "We restore everything." The Historical Society boardroom was packed. Local news cameras lined the back wall, their lenses focused on the long table where Thomas and Martha sat with Catherine, Mrs. Henderson, and a dozen other trust heirs. Across from them, Preston and his lawyers looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Let the record show," the society chairwoman began, "that we're here to review evidence regarding the historical significance of the Montgomery Bradford barn property." Preston's lawyer stood. "My client's permits are already approved. This is a waste of—" "Actually," Martha interrupted, sliding the original deed across the table, "those permits are void. The property is under a charitable trust that predates your client's claims." The lawyer examined the document, his expression shifting. He whispered urgently to Preston, whose face darkened. "Furthermore," Thomas added, "we have evidence of attempted destruction of a historical site." He nodded to the police chief, who placed photos from the gasoline incident on the table. "Circumstantial," Preston snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Catherine opened Elizabeth's journal. "We also have documented proof of the barn's role in American history, not just during the Underground Railroad era, but through Prohibition, the Civil Rights Movement, and beyond. A continuous legacy of humanitarian work," Martha added, her voice strong. "One that certain parties tried to erase for their own profit." She spread out the evidence they'd gathered. Rose's locket, the coded quilt patterns, photographs spanning decades, each piece adding to the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Preston leaned forward. "This is bigger than your little historical society. There are interests at play you don't understand." "Oh, we understand," Mrs. Henderson said calmly. "We understand that your private detention centers lose money when people have alternatives, when communities help each other, instead of turning to your services." The room grew silent. On cue, federal agents stepped in from the hallway. "Mr. Preston," one agent said, We have some questions about your company's financial relationships with certain trafficking organizations. Preston stood abruptly, but found his path blocked. This isn't over, he snarled at Thomas. Actually, Martha said, it is. The trust requires unanimous consent from all heirs for any alteration to the property. She gestured to the packed room. And we vote no. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Given the evidence presented, the Historical Society moves to immediately designate the barn and associated properties as a protected historical district. The motion carries, the secretary announced after a quick vote. Mr. Preston, your demolition permits are hereby revoked. As the agents led Preston away, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to find Martha already looking at him, her eyes bright with triumph and something more. We did it, she whispered. Catherine approached with tears in her eyes. Elizabeth and Thomas would be proud, not just of saving the barn, but of keeping its mission alive. Around them, trust heirs were sharing stories, connecting pieces of family histories long kept separate. The network wasn't just preserved, it was growing stronger. Mrs. Henderson touched the watch in Thomas's pocket. You know what 3:47 means. Now don't you? Not just a call for help, Thomas nodded. It's when night turns to dawn, when hiding becomes revealing. Elizabeth stopped the watch at that time for a reason, Martha added. She knew someday the truth would need to come to light. Through the boardroom windows, they could see the barn in the distance. Its weathered boards glowed in the afternoon sun, no longer looking worn but dignified, tested by time and stronger for it. There's still so much work to do, Thomas said. Restoration, documentation, and the network's modern mission, Martha finished. People still need help, safe places, new beginnings. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Good thing you have a whole community ready to help. Turns out that $500 barn came with quite a family. As the room began to clear, Thomas caught Martha's hand. Speaking of family, dinner tonight? We could celebrate? I'd like that. She squeezed his fingers. But first, there's something at the barn you need to see. One last secret, Elizabeth. Left for us to find. Catherine overheard and laughed. There are always more secrets. That's how they built this place to last. Layer upon layer of hope, each generation adding its own story. Outside, dark clouds threatened rain, but Thomas didn't mind. Let the storms come. The barn had weathered worse, its foundations deep, its purpose stronger than any tempest. And now its future was secure, not just as a monument to the past, but as a living promise to all those still seeking refuge, still needing hope. Ready? Martha asked, eyes twinkling with the promise of more discoveries to come. Thomas smiled. Lead the way. Evening shadows lengthened across the barn floor as Martha led Thomas to the wine cellar entrance. The day's victory had energized her. She moved with purpose, her flashlight beam dancing ahead of them. Elizabeth's last journal entry, she explained. It wasn't just about the watch stopping at 3:47. There was a second meaning we missed. They descended the familiar steps, but instead of turning toward the tunnel network, Martha led them to the far corner. Her light caught the edge of the old wine press, the gears, Thomas realized. They're not just a coding machine. They're a clock, Martha smiled, set permanently to 3:47. Together, they examined the mechanism more carefully. Thomas noticed how certain gears aligned at that specific angle, creating a pattern similar to the one in Catherine's photograph. Here, Martha said, pressing a hidden lever. With a soft click, a panel swung open in the base of the press. Inside lay a copper, a time capsule, its surface darkened with age but still intact. Engraved on its lid were the words, "For those who seek to understand." Their hands trembled as they opened it. The contents had been carefully preserved. Letters, photographs, small artifacts, each one telling part of a larger story. These are from everyone, Martha breathed, examining the papers. Not just Elizabeth and Thomas. Every family involved in the network contributed something. The first letter was from Thomas Bradford. dated the night before his stage disappearance. To those who find this, we leave these records not to glorify our work, but to remind future generations that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they stand together. The barn is more than wood and stone. It is a testament to the power of compassion, to the strength found in helping others. Elizabeth and I never married in the eyes of the law, but we built something greater than ourselves, a legacy not of wealth or power, but of hope. Each item in this capsule represents a life touched, a family protected, a future secured. The network must evolve with the times, but its heart remains constant. People helping people, asking nothing in return but the chance to make a difference. To whoever reads this, the work continues, the need remains. Let this place stand as a beacon for those who follow. With faith in the future, Thomas Bradford. Martha wiped tears from her eyes as she read. Other letters followed. From Rose Henderson, from network families, from those who'd found safety within. The barn's walls, each one adding depth to the story they'd been uncovering. Look at this, Thomas said, carefully withdrawing a stack of photographs. They showed the barn through the years, but more importantly, they showed the people, countless faces of those who'd been helped, those who'd done the helping. They kept records of everything, Martha marveled, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the right moment. At the bottom of the capsule lay two more items, a small velvet box and a sealed envelope addressed simply to the finders. The box contained two brass watches, identical to the one Thomas had discovered. Their hands pointed to 3:47. The letter was in Elizabeth's handwriting. Dear friends, if you're reading this, you've proven yourselves worthy of the trust we place in you. The barn's physical structure was never what mattered most. It was the spirit of the place, the commitment to helping others that gave it power. The watches enclosed are the last of our original set. We leave them to you, not as museum pieces, but as working tools. The network adapts, but it never dies. Your generation will face its own challenges, find its own ways to help those in need. Let these watches remind you that you're part of something larger than yourselves. A chain of compassion stretching back through time and forward into the future. The barn is yours now. Use it wisely. Use it well, with hope and faith. Elizabeth Montgomery. Thomas and Martha sat in silence, surrounded by the weight of history and responsibility. Above them, the old barn creaked gently, as if acknowledging its secrets finally brought to light. You know what this means, Martha said finally. The work isn't finished. It's just beginning. Thomas picked up one of the watches, feeling its weight, the same weight that had drawn him to the first one weeks ago. We'll need help, he said. Martha smiled, touching Rose's locket at her throat. Look around. We've got generations of it. She was right. They had the Trust heirs, the Historical Society, a whole community ready to continue the legacy. The barn wasn't just saved, it was reborn. Elizabeth knew, Thomas said softly. She knew someday someone would find that first watch and follow the trail. Everything they left us, the codes, the quilts, the tunnels, it was all leading to this moment. To us, Martha added, taking his hand above them. The barn's weathered beams held firm, still sheltering secrets, still offering hope. Night was falling, but for Thomas and Martha it felt like dawn. A new chapter was beginning, and this time they would help write it. Dawn painted the barn in shades of gold as volunteers gathered for the first official day of restoration. Thomas stood with the original architectural plans spread across a makeshift table, Martha at his side as they outlined the work ahead. The structural integrity is good, he explained to the gathered group. Those old builders knew what they were doing. Our job is to preserve, not just repair. The crowd was diverse. Local craftsmen, Trust heirs, Historical Society members, and even a few former beneficiaries of the network come to help preserve the place that had once sheltered them. We'll work in teams, Martha added, her librarians. Organization skills proving invaluable. Documentation, restoration, and historical research. Everything we do needs to be recorded properly. Catherine arrived with coffee and donuts for everyone. The grant money came through, she announced. The Historical Society's funding this as a full preservation project. And the modern mission? Thomas asked quietly. The Trust is handling that side, she assured him. Separate funding, separate records, just like Elizabeth and Thomas set it up. They began with the basics: cleaning, cataloguing, careful documentation of every historical detail. Each discovery brought new insights. Behind one wall, they found a cache of vintage medical supplies, carefully preserved. The barn wasn't just a way station, Mrs. Henderson explained, examining the finds. It was a safe place for doctors to treat people who couldn't go to hospitals, who couldn't risk official records. In another corner, they uncovered a hidden printing press. For documents, Martha realized. Papers, certificates, whatever people needed to start new lives. The museum curator supervised the cataloging of each artifact. We'll create rotating exhibits, she explained. Tell the whole story, not just the Underground Railroad parts. Show how the mission evolved over time. As they worked, Thomas watched Martha in her element. She moved between groups, connecting pieces of history, helping volunteers understand the significance of each discovery. The passion that had made her a great librarian now made her an invaluable preservationist. You know, he said during a quiet moment, this is bigger than anything I imagined when I bought the place. She smiled, brushing dust from her jeans, having second thoughts about that $500 investment. Best money I ever spent. He looked around at the bustling activity, not just for the barn, for everything it led to. The restoration work revealed new secrets daily, under floorboards, behind walls, in the spaces between spaces. Each discovery added depth to their understanding. But more importantly, it brought people together, creating new connections, strengthening old ones. Local businesses donated supplies. Craftsmen offered their skills. Families shared stories passed down through generations. The barn was becoming more than a historical site. It was a living community center. Elizabeth would have loved this, Mrs. Henderson said. Watching young volunteers learned traditional restoration techniques from retired craftsmen, the past and present working together. The museum began offering tours of the parts that were safe for public viewing. School groups came through, learning about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. But we never show everything, Martha reminded the tour guides. Some secrets stay secret, some work continues. By sunset, they had accomplished more than Thomas had thought possible in a single day. The barn's exterior was cleaned, its structural points mapped, its historical features carefully documented. As the volunteers packed up, Catherine gathered everyone for a photograph. For the new time capsule, she explained, the next generation should know who helped save this place. Thomas and Martha stood with the group, surrounded by their newfound family. Above them, the barn rose strong and sure, its weathered boards glowing in the evening light. You know, Martha said later as they reviewed the day's documentation, we're not just restoring a building, we're restoring faith in humanity, in the power of community. Thomas thought of Elizabeth and Thomas, Bradford, of Rose Henderson, of all those who'd come before, ordinary people who'd looked at a simple barn and seen the potential for something more. Tomorrow we start on the tunnels, he said. Make sure they're secure for whatever comes next. Martha finished. She touched the watch at her throat. She'd turned Elizabeth's gift into a pendant, a constant reminder of their mission. Outside, stars began to appear. The barn stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, no longer just a structure, but a symbol of hope, of possibility, of the extraordinary things that could grow from a simple $500 investment and the courage to see beyond the surface. The work ahead was enormous, but Thomas had never felt more ready. He had Martha, their extended family of trust heirs, and a legacy of helping others that stretched back generations. Sometimes, he realized, the best. Restoration work wasn't about returning something to what it had been, but about helping it become what it was always meant to be. 1 month later, Thomas stood in the barn's main room, now transformed into a museum space. Clean wooden beams soared overhead, their rich patina preserved by careful restoration. Display cases held selected artifacts, each telling part of the story while keeping the network's deeper secrets safe. Martha worked with a team of volunteers, arranging the final exhibits. She'd taken a leave of absence from the library to serve as the museum's historical director, her passion for preservation finding a new purpose. The governor confirmed for the opening ceremony, Catherine announced, checking her phone. National. Au Press, too. Elizabeth's story caught people's imagination. Not just Elizabeth's, Martha said. Everyone's. All the ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Thomas watched her work, remembering that first day when she'd appeared in the barn doorway. How much had changed since then. The barn, the community, themselves. Mrs. Henderson approached with a small velvet box. We found this in Rose's effects. She would have wanted you to have it. Inside lay a simple gold ring, its band engraved with a familiar pattern, the same one from the coded quilt. It was Thomas Bradford's, Mrs. Henderson explained. He left it with Rose before he disappeared, said someday it should go to someone who understood what the barn really meant. Martha's eyes met Thomas's across the room. The air between them hummed with possibility. The touring groups are booked solid for 6 months, the museum curator reported, checking her calendar. Schools, historical societies, civil rights organizations, and the other work, Thomas asked quietly. Continues, Catherine assured him. The public sees what we want them to see. The network stays active, stronger than ever. Martha joined them, her hand finding Thomas's naturally. Rose would be proud of all of it. The preparations for opening. Day continued around them, displays arranged, security systems tested, tours rehearsed. But beneath the public face, the barn's heart remained true to its original purpose. New tunnels had been carefully incorporated into the renovation, hidden behind historical exhibits. Modern technology meshed seamlessly with old techniques. The network adapted, as it always had. There's something I want to show you, Thomas said to Martha as evening approached. He led her up to the hayloft, now restored to its original beauty. Through the window, they could see the spot where he'd first stood with his $500 investment, where Elizabeth had once watched for signals, where generations had kept their vigil of hope. I've been thinking, he said, taking her hand, about legacy, about purpose. Martha smiled, touching the watch at her throat. About finding what you were meant to do, about finding who I was meant to find. He withdrew Rose's ring from his pocket. The barn brought us together for a reason, and not just because of the history. Her eyes shone in the fading light. Or maybe exactly because of history. All those people who worked together, loved together, built something larger than themselves. Marry me. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they'd discovered together. Help me continue what they started? Yes. She held out her hand, and the ring slid on perfectly, to all of it. Below they could hear the volunteers finishing up, the happy sounds of community and purpose. Tomorrow would bring the grand opening, the official recognition of the barn's historical significance, but tonight was for them, for the quiet acknowledgement that they were now part of something ancient and ongoing, a chain of commitment stretching back through time and forward into the future. Mrs. Henderson found them there later, silhouetted in the window like figures from an old photograph. You know, she said, Rose used to say the barn had a way of calling to the right people, of bringing together those who were meant to carry on the work. Martha's new ring caught the last light of sunset, its coded pattern a promise of secrets, shared and purpose found. Ready for tomorrow? Thomas asked them both. "Ready for everything," Martha answered. Outside, the restored barn stood proud against the darkening sky. Inside, its heart beat with renewed purpose, its legacy secure in the hands of those who understood its true value. Some investments, Thomas thought, holding Martha close, paid dividends that couldn't be measured in dollars. Some returns were counted in lives touched, in hope preserved, in love found among the shadows of history. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and bright. Thomas stood before the barn's freshly restored doors, remembering that first day when he'd stood here with nothing but $500 and a dream of renovation. Now, the grounds were filled with people, trust heirs from across the country, local families, media and dignitaries. Martha appeared beside him, beautiful in a vintage dress that echoed Elizabeth's era. Rose's ring gleamed on her finger, its coded pattern catching the morning light. "The governor's here," she said, "and look who else came." Through the crowd, Thomas spotted familiar faces from the network. People they'd helped over the past month, now returning as volunteers, each one carrying their own story of hope and renewal. Catherine gathered everyone for the ceremony. On the podium, photographs of Elizabeth and Thomas Bradford flanked a display of artifacts: the watch, the quilt, the coding machine. Each piece telling part of a larger story. "Today," Catherine began, "we celebrate not just the preservation of a building, but the endurance of the human spirit. This barn stands as a testament to ordinary people who saw injustice and chose to act." The governor spoke about historical significance. The museum curator detailed educational programs. But it was Mrs. Henderson who captured the barn's true meaning. "Some places," she said, "hold more than history. They hold hope. Generation after generation, this barn has been a beacon for those in need. Its legacy lives not in these walls, but in the lives touched, the families united, the futures secured." Thomas squeezed Martha's hand as they prepared to cut the ribbon. Above them the barn rose strong and true, its weathered boards telling a century of stories. "And now," Catherine announced, "we have one final dedication." She unveiled a new time. Capsule, its copper surface gleaming. Inside are records of not just what was, but what continues. Stories from every family involved in the barn's history, including its newest caretakers. Thomas and Martha stepped forward with their contribution, a leather-bound journal containing their own story, from that first $500 investment to the discovery of their shared purpose. Alongside it, they placed a photograph of their engagement. In the hayloft, the coded ring visible on Martha's hand. "Future generations will know," Martha said, "that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. That purpose can find you when you least expect it." The capsule was sealed into its place in the wall, hidden behind a panel that only those who knew the barn's secrets could find. As the public tours began, Thomas and Martha slipped away to the wine cellar. In the restored tunnels below, another ceremony was taking place, one the public would never see. A family stood waiting, parents and children carrying small bags, eyes bright with hope. Mrs. Henderson handed them new documents, new identities, a chance to escape persecution in their homeland. "The network adapts," she said softly. "New threats, new needs, same mission." Martha checked her watch. Elizabeth's watch now keeping time again. "Transport's ready. Northern route is clear." The family moved through the hidden passages, guided by network volunteers. Their gratitude needed no translation. "This is the real grand opening," Thomas said after they'd gone. The barn doing what it was meant to do. Later, as sunset painted, the sky, the public ceremonies wound down. Trust heirs gathered in the main room, sharing stories and plans for the future. Children played among the displays, unconsciously learning the lesson that one person's courage could change many lives. Martha found Thomas in the hayloft, watching the last light fade. "Thinking about that first day," she asked, "thinking about all the days to come." He turned to her. "You know, when I bought this place, I thought I was just getting a building to restore. Instead, you found a mission, a community, a family." She touched Rose's ring, a future. Below, they could hear Mrs. Henderson beginning the last tour of the day. Her voice carried up through the restored beams. "The story of this barn isn't over. Every generation adds its own chapter. Every person who walks through these doors becomes part of something larger than themselves." Thomas held Martha close as night settled over their barn. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people needing help, new ways to preserve hope in a changing world. But they were ready. They had each other, their extended family of trust heirs, and a legacy of courage that stretched back through time. "Worth the investment," Martha teased. Thomas kissed her softly. "Best $500 I ever spent." Outside, stars began to appear, the same stars that had guided so many to freedom through the years. Inside, the barn held its secrets close, its heart beating with renewed purpose. Some buildings were just buildings, but some, like this barn, were gateways to something more, to hope, to courage, to love. And as Thomas and Martha stood in the gathering darkness, they knew their story was just beginning. The next chapter waited to be written, just as Elizabeth and Thomas Bradford had known it would. After all, the greatest adventures often start with the smallest investments. Sometimes all it takes is $500, an old barn, and the courage to look beyond the surface to find something extraordinary waiting to be discovered.